Made in Australia, it was the proud boast from the manufacturing sector, once the country's biggest employer. That base has shrunk dramatically, with Australia now coming a distant last compared to OECD nations like Ireland. But local demand for Australian-made is on the up, as international COVID-19 shutdowns open up new opportunities for efficient niche manufacturers. Rachel Papazzoni reports.
The COVID-induced global shutdown to supply chains is good news for this metal 3D printing company in Adelaide.
We've seen quite a reasonable increase, probably twofold from what we would normally get.
AML 3D uses the world's biggest 3D metal printer to make parts for the shipping industry, using a mix of traditional and new technology. With casting and forging shops closed in Italy and other areas of Europe where marine parts are usually made, new opportunities have opened up.
Some of these customers in Australia here were looking for local solutions.
It's the kind of niche manufacturing economists and the sector want to see fostered beyond the pandemic shutdowns. In the decades after World War II, Australia's manufacturing thrived behind a tariff wall. But since the 1990s, it's been in steady decline as those walls came down. In the late 1980s, manufacturing was the biggest employer in Australia, with 16.5% of the workforce. Now, less than 1 million people work in the sector, accounting for 6.4% of jobs. Manufacturing's contribution to GDP peaked in the late 1950s and 60s. It's now shrunk to about 5.5%. And compared to our OECD partners, we're not pulling our weight.
Australia has one of the most underdeveloped manufacturing sectors of any industrial country in the world.
New analysis shared with The Business reveals Australia is the worst performer when it comes to manufacturing self-sufficiency, or the amount of goods we make in relation to the amount of goods we use. While Ireland leads the world with the equivalent of twice as many goods as it uses, way down the bottom of 36 OECD countries is Australia, producing the equivalent of 3/4 of what we use. Dr. Stanford says Australia is missing out on crucial international trade.
About 2/3 of all world trade consists of manufactured products. So if you don't have a strong domestic manufacturing base, you're shutting yourself out of most world commerce.
One Australian manufacturer working to get its slice of international trade is Storm Seal. It makes a film that's laid on storm-damaged roofs and shrink-wrapped when heat is applied to it, forming a waterproof seal. Right now, 30,000 square metres of it covers the National Library and Australian National University in Canberra after they were damaged by hail in January. It was all made in Sydney.
When a big storm hits, we can actually have got the ability to make it on demand.
Unlike many manufacturers, Mr Lennox has decided to use Australian labour rather than Asian. He says it puts him closer to his customer and supports more local jobs.
It's not just the manufacturing, it's the supply chain that has benefits. So our polymer, our fire retardancy, our UV inhibitors that go into the film, that all has a flow-on benefit.
With Australia's official unemployment rate at 7.4%, but more likely 11.4% according to the Treasurer, manufacturing groups say incentivising their industry will help create more jobs.
We've gone from being very significant employers and from being a significant chunk of GDP down to less than 1 million people now.
The South East Melbourne Manufacturers Alliance wants governments of all levels to mandate procuring Australian-made goods to encourage more products to be made here.
It makes sense, if we can make it in Australia, to make it in Australia.
I think out of this crisis, if there was any benefit out of it, there's been benefit of the opportunity for some of these new technologies.
A pandemic that's crippled the world could deliver a silver lining for Australia.